Love, in its truest form, is not merely an emotion, nor a fleeting passion ignited by surface attraction. It is, rather, a profound psychic event, a mysterious force that calls the soul toward wholeness. In the depths of the human psyche, love operates as a catalyst for individuation, the inner process by which the self becomes unified, integrated, and truly itself. Love is the fire that burns away illusions, the mirror that reflects back what we are, and more importantly, what we are not yet. It does not simply comfort, it disturbs, challenges, and ultimately transforms. At the start, what we often call love is riddled with projection. We fall not in love with a person, but with our own unconscious ideals, fantasies, and longings that we place upon them. The beloved becomes a screen upon which our hidden desires and unknown parts of the self are displayed. Yet this is not a failure of love, it is its initiation. Projection is not to be despised, it is the necessary first step in revealing the unconscious contents of the psyche. When we are drawn to someone, we are, in a deeper sense, drawn to a part of ourselves that we have yet to fully know. This is the mystery and the danger of love. It introduces us to our depths under the illusion of meeting someone else. As the relationship matures, these projections begin to dissolve, the veil lifts, the beloved begins to appear not as a perfect embodiment of our dreams, but as a real, complex, fallible human being. For many, this is the moment when love falters, when disappointment sets in and the fantasy evaporates. But for those willing to endure the psychological labor of love, this is precisely the moment when true love begins. The dissolving of projection makes space for authentic perception. We begin to see the other as they are, not as we wish them to be, and in doing so, we also begin to see ourselves more clearly. In this seeing, we encounter not only the beauty of the beloved, but also their wounds, shadows, and contradictions. To truly love is to embrace this full spectrum, to accept the darkness alongside the light. This acceptance is not passive or naive. It requires strength of character and a willingness to confront the same contradictions within ourselves. Love thus becomes an arena of mutual shadow work. We are forced to reconcile with our own fears, insecurities, and defenses, and to hold space for the same in the other. This painful yet necessary engagement with shadow is what enables integration, the harmonizing of opposites within the self. The person who loves deeply does not seek to change or control the other, but rather to understand. Such love is not dependency, but dialogue. It is not built on merging into one indistinct whole, but on the respectful tension between two differentiated selves. This tension is vital. It prevents the loss of individuality, and yet it draws both people into growth. The friction of difference becomes a source of psychological evolution. Love, then, is not a state of stasis. It is a dynamic, alchemical process through which the soul is refined. It is in this crucible that the ego is tested. The ego, with its demands, its pride, and its relentless need for affirmation, must step aside to make room for empathy, humility, and surrender. In genuine love, the ego does not dominate. It listens. It learns to place the needs of the other alongside its own. This is not submission, but transcendence. In giving love, the self expands beyond its own narrow interests. In receiving love, the self recognizes its inherent worth, not through achievement, but through simply being. This mutual affirmation opens a gateway to psychological wholeness. To love in this way is to be transformed. It is to undergo an inner pilgrimage, one that leads from fragmentation to coherence. The beloved becomes a symbolic figure representing not just another person, but a challenge and invitation from the depths of the unconscious. The trials of love misunderstandings, vulnerability, forgiveness, and acceptance are initiatory in nature. They compel the individual to grow beyond previous limitations, to develop emotional maturity, and to engage in continual self-reflection. Love is not merely a private experience, it touches the archetypal. Within every human being resides the potential for integration of opposites, masculine and feminine, rational and intuitive, active and receptive. True love brings these inner polarities into contact. It awakens the anima in man and the animus in woman, those deep contrasexual figures that reside in the unconscious. When awakened, they offer insight, creativity, and spiritual direction. The union with the beloved thus echoes the inner union that individuation seeks to achieve. In this sense, the outer relationship mirrors an inner one. Every act of compassion toward the beloved is also a gesture of healing toward the inner self. Every moment of deep presence, of sincere communication, becomes a step on the path toward becoming whole. Love, then, is not simply about finding the right person. It is about becoming the right person. It is not an escape from oneself, but a return to the deepest parts of who one is. Thus, love as a force is far greater than romance, passion, or even companionship. It is a spiritual and psychological journey toward the self, the totality of who we are, both conscious and unconscious. It is a summons to confront our limitations, transcend our egos, and embrace our full humanity. And in doing so, we come to know not only the other, but the mystery and miracle of our own soul in the early stages of what we call love. It is rarely the other person we truly see. What captures us, what ignites the flame within, is not the reality of who they are, but rather a set of images, ideals, and fantasies that we unknowingly project onto them. This projection is not a flaw or a failing of human nature. It is a fundamental mechanism of the psyche. We fall in love not with the actual person, but with a reflection of ourselves, our longings, our forgotten potentials, our unresolved wounds. The beloved becomes a screen for our unconscious, a mirror for all that lies dormant within. In this sense, love is initially a relationship not with the other, but with the hidden dimensions of our own soul. This phenomenon is powerful and often intoxicating. The beloved appears radiant, flawless, almost divine. We imagine them to be everything we have ever desired, the perfect completion of our fragmented self. In doing so, we do not relate to them as they truly are, but rather as we need them to be. This illusion can be both beautiful and dangerous. It draws us close, it binds us, but it also blinds us. The lover is elevated to an archetype, be it the savior, the muse, the eternal mother or father, and in doing so, their humanity is obscured. We are no longer engaging with a living, breathing person, but with a fantasy that lives within the confines of our own psyche. This projection phase, though illusory, plays a vital role in psychological development. Through it, we come into contact with parts of ourselves that were previously unknown or inaccessible. The idealized image of the other stirs something deep within us. It evokes beauty, passion, creativity, and emotional intensity. But this can only last for so long. Sooner or later, the cracks begin to appear. The other begins to speak in ways that do not fit the script we wrote for them. They disappoint, confuse, or even anger us. We begin to see that they are not our fantasy. They are human, flawed, and complex. At this turning point, a profound opportunity presents itself. When the projection begins to dissolve, we are faced with a choice: to retreat into disillusionment, claiming that love has failed us, or to step into a deeper and more honest form of relationship. This is the threshold where real perception becomes possible. We are invited to strip away the veil and see the other not as an extension of ourselves, but as a unique and autonomous being. This is not easy. It requires humility, the death of illusion, and the willingness to endure uncertainty. But it is here that love begins to transform from an unconscious possession into a conscious act. Real perception in love is not simply seeing the other's virtues or strengths. It means acknowledging their entirety, their contradictions, fears, vulnerabilities, and inconsistencies. It means holding space for their shadow as well as their light. It requires patience and attentiveness, the kind that listens beyond words and observes beyond appearances. To truly perceive another is a sacred act. It is to say, "I see you," and to mean it, not as a projection of desire, but as a recognition of their full humanity. This kind of perception is rare, for it demands that we also confront the projections within ourselves. We must ask, what was I looking for? What need was I placing on them? What does their presence awaken in me that I have not yet accepted in myself? As we begin to answer these questions, we not only see the other more clearly, but we also begin to see ourselves with new eyes. The dissolution of projection is not merely an act of disillusionment, it is an act of integration. Those traits we once adored or feared in the other are revealed as parts of our own psyche, now made visible through the mirror of relationship. Love, in this light, becomes a tool for inner work. Each encounter, each misunderstanding, each revelation becomes an invitation to greater self-awareness. The ego resists this kind of love. It prefers the certainty and control of projection, the fantasy where all is ideal and known. But true love thrives in the unknown, in the ever-evolving dance of two individuals discovering each other and themselves anew. Real perception does not romanticize, it reveres. It honors the complexity of the other without trying to simplify or possess it. In such love, the relationship becomes a living dialogue, a space where both partners are allowed to grow, change, and reveal their truest selves. In truth, the shift from projection to perception is the core transformation in any deep human bond. It is what distinguishes infatuation from commitment, fantasy from authenticity, and it is not a single moment of revelation, but an ongoing practice. Just as projections can fall away, they can also return. Old patterns reassert themselves, especially in times of stress or fear. The task is to remain vigilant, to continue the work of seeing, listening, and understanding. In this ongoing effort, love becomes not just a feeling but a discipline, a way of being that calls us to higher levels of consciousness. Ultimately, to move from projection to perception is to open the door to true intimacy. It is to stand before the other without masks and to invite them to do the same. It is a love that does not depend on perfection, but on presence. A love that does not seek to complete, but to accompany. A love that does not fall prey to illusion, but embraces the beauty and tragedy of truth. In this space, both people are free not to escape themselves, but to finally come home to who they are. Within the hidden architecture of the human psyche dwell archetypal energies that shape the way we love, desire, and relate. These inner figures, though largely unconscious, exert a profound influence over our emotional lives. In every man resides an inner feminine principle, what depth psychology calls the anima. In every woman, an inner masculine counterpart exists, the animus. These are not mere gender stereotypes, nor are they reducible to societal roles. They are symbolic energies, psychic representations of the opposite within, waiting to be encountered, integrated, and ultimately harmonized. Love, especially in its most intense and mysterious forms, often signals the activation of these inner figures. When we feel inexplicably drawn to someone, when their presence awakens something in us that feels ancient, familiar, and yet entirely new, It may be that our anima or animus has stirred. These inner archetypes carry immense psychological charge. The anima in a man is not just a feminine image. It is the soul, the emotional bridge to the unconscious. She may appear in dreams as a mysterious woman, a siren, a guide, or even a destructive force. The animus in a woman, on the other hand, tends to appear as a powerful male figure, perhaps a teacher, a warrior, a critic, or a savior. These figures represent the unacknowledged aspects of ourselves. When we encounter someone in the outer world who seems to match or evoke these images, the result can be overwhelming. We experience what seems like love at first sight, but beneath the surface, it is not simply a romantic event. It is a psychic resonance. This resonance is not accidental. It emerges from the deep structures of the psyche, the parts of ourselves that seek wholeness through union with the unknown. The beloved becomes the embodiment of our inner opposite, and we are magnetically pulled toward them. This is not a choice, it is a compulsion born from the unconscious. We see in the other what we lack in ourselves, and in doing so, we begin to experience the expansion of the self. But we must understand that what we feel is not just about the other person. It is also about us, about our journey, our missing pieces, and the symbols that arise from within to guide our transformation. The anima and animus are not static. They evolve as we do. In the beginning, these archetypes often appear in primitive or idealized form. A man might project onto a woman his longing for nurturing, mystery, or salvation. A woman may project onto a man her desire for strength, wisdom, or divine authority. These projections are powerful but incomplete. They turn the beloved into a myth rather than a human being. Yet this is where the process begins, through the trials of love through conflict, disappointment, and revelation. We begin to strip away the projection and see the other as they are. In doing so, the archetype within also transforms. The anima becomes less of a fantasy and more of an inner companion, a creative muse, a source of emotional wisdom. The animus shifts from tyrant or hero into a voice of reason, clarity, and inner strength. When two people experience this kind of resonance, when their inner anima and animus are awakened in each other, the relationship takes on a quality that feels larger than life. It is not merely two egos interacting, but two souls dancing in the symbolic realm. Their connection transcends words and logic. It feels fated, archetypal, even spiritual. This intensity can be both beautiful and dangerous, because what is being stirred is not only love, but the totality of our psychic inheritance. The relationship becomes a vessel for transformation, but only if both people are willing to do the inner work. Without that commitment, the intensity can collapse under the weight of unmet expectations and unresolved projections. What makes this resonance so significant is that it touches the very process of individuation. To meet and integrate the anima or animus is to reclaim a vital part of the self. The man who embraces his anima becomes more emotionally intelligent, more attuned to intuition, beauty, and empathy. The woman who integrates her animus becomes more decisive, intellectually grounded, and able to assert herself in the world. Through the relationship with the other, the inner balance is restored. This is not about conforming to roles, but about becoming whole. Love, in this context, is the crucible in which the psyche is reshaped. But such integration does not happen passively. It requires awareness. One must learn to distinguish between the real person and the archetype they seem to embody. This distinction is subtle but essential. The moment we realize that the beloved is not a goddess or god, but a flawed human being, we are faced with a choice: to retreat into fantasy or to embrace the deeper work of love. It is in that moment that the anima or animus becomes real, not projected onto someone else, but internalized and understood. The relationship becomes a sacred dialogue between conscious self and unconscious other, each partner reflecting and refining the other. This process does not remove the magic of love, it deepens it. The mystery does not vanish when we see the beloved clearly, it becomes more profound. We begin to realize that the other is not a solution to our incompleteness, but a companion in our search for meaning. The anima and animus are no longer forces that control us unconsciously. They become allies in our psychological growth. We love not because we are incomplete, but because love is the path through which we become whole. In loving and being loved, in seeing and being seen, we activate the inner archetypes that lead us into deeper contact with ourselves. And so, what begins as a resonance between two people becomes a lifelong journey into the heart of the psyche, where the divine feminine and masculine meet, not in fantasy, but in lived reality. Love, in its truest and most transformative form, does not only dwell in the realm of joy, beauty, and idealized connection, it also leads us to the dark places within ourselves and within the ones we love. There is a hidden dimension to every relationship, a silent force that shapes interactions, reactions, and emotional intensities. The shadow. The shadow is not evil, but it is unknown. It consists of all the traits, desires, impulses, and fears that the conscious self refuses to accept. It is everything we repress, deny, or project onto others. And in love, more than in any other human experience, the shadow is activated. It emerges not to sabotage the connection, but to offer the possibility of profound psychological growth through integration. At first, love may seem like an escape from the shadow. We are drawn to the light in another person, their warmth, laughter, insight, or strength. We fall in love with their perceived perfection, with what they reflect back to us about ourselves that is lovable and worthy. But as the relationship deepens, as the illusions fall away and real intimacy begins, the shadow begins to surface. We start to see the parts of them that are less admirable, and we encounter in ourselves reactions that are unfamiliar and sometimes disturbing. Jealousy, resentment, dependency, fear of abandonment, rage. These emotions do not arise by accident. They are signals from the unconscious that deeper material is being activated. It is easy in such moments to blame the other, to believe that they have changed or failed us. But often what we are experiencing is a projection of our own disowned parts. We unconsciously place our unwanted traits onto the person we love, making them the carrier of our own darkness. If we are insecure, we may accuse them of being too distant. If we are controlling, we may see them as unpredictable or disloyal. What we cannot accept in ourselves, we condemn in the other. Love thus becomes a battlefield between what is conscious and what is not yet integrated. Yet it is precisely here that love becomes transformative. When we recognize that the intensity of our emotional responses is not solely about the partner's behavior, but about our own psychic material, we are offered a moment of awakening. The beloved becomes a mirror, showing us not only what is admirable, but what is unhealed. Through their presence, we are forced to confront parts of ourselves that have long remained in the dark. This confrontation is not easy. It requires courage, honesty, and humility. But it is in this process that the real work of love begins. Shadow integration in love is the practice of owning our projections, of taking back what we have disowned and choosing to examine it rather than exile it. It involves asking difficult questions. Why does this situation make me so angry? What fear is being triggered in me? What part of myself have I not fully accepted that is now being reflected by this relationship? As we explore these questions, we begin to recognize the patterns that shape our emotional lives. we see how old wounds from childhood or past relationships continue to influence how we interpret and respond to current events. Love becomes a path to healing, not because it is easy, but because it is real. In a relationship where both partners are committed to shadow work, the dynamic shifts from conflict to co-creation. Instead of blaming or withdrawing, there is a shared intention to understand. When one person's shadow emerges through anger, fear, or withdrawal, the other can hold space without judgment. This does not mean tolerating abuse or excusing harmful behavior. Rather, it means recognizing that these expressions are part of a deeper psychological struggle. By naming the shadow and engaging with it consciously, both individuals grow. The relationship becomes a crucible for transformation, a container for the alchemical process of turning unconscious material into conscious awareness. The beauty of shadow integration is that it does not aim for perfection, but wholeness. In this way, love ceases to be an ideal to live up to and becomes a journey of becoming. When we allow ourselves to be seen in our entirety, not just in our strengths but also in our vulnerability and darkness, we invite the same from the other. Intimacy deepens not in the absence of flaws, but in the acceptance of them. We realize that love does not demand we hide our shadow, but that we make peace with it. Through this peace, compassion emerges, not only for the beloved, but for ourselves. We begin to understand that being human means being complex, and that love is not about fixing each other, but about witnessing and embracing each other in the full spectrum of existence. As the shadow becomes integrated, it loses its power to sabotage. What once triggered disproportionate reactions now becomes material for dialogue. Emotions become messages rather than threats. The energy once used to suppress or deny the shadow is freed and redirected into creativity, empathy, and insight. We discover that beneath the anger is a cry for connection, that beneath the fear is a longing to be held, and that beneath the control is a deep vulnerability yearning for safety. By holding these truths in love, we help each other to grow, not away from our shadow, but through it. In the end, the path of love is not a flight from darkness, but a descent into it, with the light of consciousness as our guide. It is in the shadow that the soul reveals itself. It is through the confrontation with our hidden selves that we become whole. Love, when it dares to face the shadow, becomes not just a bond between two people, but a sacred journey toward the depths of the human psyche. In this journey, we do not lose ourselves. We find the parts we never knew we had. Love, in its deepest and most authentic form, is not merely a union of two people, but an invitation to transcend the confines of the ego. The ego, that central structure of consciousness through which we navigate the world, is necessary for our survival and identity, yet it is also limited, prone to illusion, defensiveness, and control. It defines itself through separation. This is me, that is you. It seeks security, recognition, and validation. In love, however, something ancient and transformative is activated, a force that challenges the ego's primacy and opens the door to a broader, more interconnected experience of being. The experience of love, particularly when it stirs the soul rather than just the senses, unsettles the ego because it threatens its illusion of independence. When we fall in love, we are confronted by something greater than ourselves. The other person seems to hold a key to a part of us we had not yet encountered. They awaken emotions, memories, longings, and depths that the ego alone cannot control or fully comprehend. Suddenly, the boundaries between self and other begin to blur. We feel deeply seen and also strangely vulnerable. It is not uncommon to say, "I feel like I've known them forever," or "they complete me." These expressions are not just poetic. They point to the dissolving of the ego's usual categories. The lover becomes more than another person. They become a mirror, a symbol, an entry point into the unknown regions of our psyche. Through love, we touch the mystery of wholeness, and the ego, rooted in division, begins to tremble. This trembling is both beautiful and terrifying. The ego fears its dissolution, yet it also yearns for what lies beyond its walls. In love, we taste this paradox. We want to surrender and yet remain in control. We want to merge and yet hold on to identity. This inner conflict often surfaces in relationships through possessiveness, jealousy, fear of abandonment, or the need to define and contain the connection. These tensions are not signs that love is failing. They are indicators that the ego is struggling to maintain its dominance. Real love does not destroy the ego, but it does challenge it. It reveals how small, how fearful, and how rigid the ego can be when confronted with something it cannot grasp or dominate. The process of transcending the ego in love is not a passive one. It requires active awareness and surrender. This surrender is not about losing oneself in the other or becoming dependent. Rather, it is about releasing the false idea that the self is fixed, separate, and in control. It is about recognizing that true intimacy demands vulnerability, the willingness to be seen, to be changed, and to let go of the masks we wear. The ego clings to roles and identities, but love asks us to reveal what is raw, real, and unguarded. In doing so, we become more than we thought we were. The edges of the self soften, and a deeper center begins to emerge, one rooted not in fear but in connection. This deeper center is often called the self in psychological terms, a wholeness that transcends the polarities of conscious and unconscious, known and unknown. Love becomes the crucible through which the ego is refined and reoriented toward this greater self. In moments of true connection, we experience a sense of unity that cannot be explained by logic alone. We feel at once deeply ourselves and yet entirely part of something larger. This is not a loss of identity, but an expansion. The ego, when softened by love, becomes a vessel rather than a barrier. It learns to serve rather than control. It begins to listen, to feel, and to relate from a place of openness rather than defense. Of course, this process is not linear. The ego does not simply dissolve and never return. It reasserts itself, especially in moments of insecurity or threat. It tries to regain control, to re-establish old patterns, to protect its territory. But each time love invites us beyond those limits, and each time we choose to follow, something within us is transformed. We become more attuned, more compassionate, more capable of seeing the other not as an object to fulfill our needs, but as a fellow traveler on the path to wholeness. This shift from egoic desire to soulful presence is the heart of mature love. In such love, silence becomes as meaningful as words. Holding space becomes more powerful than fixing problems. The relationship is no longer based on transaction or mutual reinforcement of identities, but on a shared commitment to growth, depth, and truth. Each person is responsible for their own inner work, yet they walk together, supporting and challenging one another to move beyond fear, beyond ego, into the sacred unknown. Arguments, misunderstandings, and moments of distance are no longer signs of failure, but opportunities for greater awareness and integration. Love becomes not an escape from the self, but a continual invitation to return to the self more deeply and more honestly. In transcending the ego through love, we encounter a new kind of freedom. It is not the freedom to do whatever we want, but the freedom from the compulsion to defend, dominate, or define ourselves at the expense of the other. It is a freedom rooted in presence, in the capacity to see and be seen without distortion. It is a freedom that allows love to flow without attachment to outcome, because love is no longer about possession. It is about transformation. We are no longer trying to protect a fragile identity, but to awaken to a shared reality where love is not something we possess, but something we become. In that space, the ego does not disappear. It is simply no longer the master. It becomes the servant of a greater truth. The truth that in love we find ourselves not in separation, but in unity. Love, when stripped of illusion and fantasy, reveals itself not as a merging of sameness, but as the meeting of opposites. It is a dynamic interplay between contrasts, light and dark, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious. The true depth of love does not lie in comfort or compatibility alone, but in the creative tension that arises when two different worlds collide and seek harmony without erasing their differences. This union of opposites is not merely a poetic metaphor, it is a psychological and spiritual necessity for wholeness. Within each individual lies a constellation of polarities, reason and emotion, strength and vulnerability, independence and longing. To fully experience love is to allow these inner opposites to be mirrored and stirred by another, and in that interaction to participate in a larger dance that is both personal and archetypal. The allure of the beloved often arises from the qualities they possess that we feel are lacking in ourselves. A deeply rational person may be drawn to someone emotive and intuitive. A grounded, pragmatic individual may fall for someone ethereal and imaginative. These attractions are not random, they reflect the psyche's attempt to balance itself through the projection of the inner opposite onto the outer other. Love, then, becomes a stage upon which these latent aspects of the self are awakened and explored. The beloved seems magical because they carry something we yearn to know and integrate within ourselves. This tension is not a flaw, it is the very fire that forges transformation. In embracing the other, we begin to reclaim the lost or neglected parts of our own being. Yet this process is not seamless. The union of opposites is often marked by conflict, misunderstanding, and discomfort. When two fundamentally different energies come into contact, there is friction. One person may seek closeness while the other withdraws. One may express freely while the other guards their interior. These differences challenge each partner to examine their own biases, defenses, and assumptions. It is tempting to try to change the other, to demand that they mirror our world, view, but this urge comes from the ego's need for predictability and control. True love, however, invites us into uncertainty. It asks us to remain open to that which is unfamiliar, to sit with dissonance long enough for deeper understanding to emerge. The friction, if held consciously, becomes fertile ground for growth. In this way, love becomes an alchemical process. Just as ancient alchemists sought to unite opposing elements to create gold, the inner alchemist seeks to integrate the opposing forces within and between individuals to create wholeness. Fire meets water, air meets earth, and something new is born. This does not mean the dissolution of individuality, but rather its expansion. The goal is not fusion, where two become one in sameness, but union, where two remain distinct yet deeply connected. Each partner retains their essence while being transformed by the presence of the other. Through love, we learn to hold paradox, to be strong and soft, clear and uncertain, self-sufficient and interdependent.